Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. And I am today joined, and I'm really excited about this, as I am with all my guests, of course. Really excited to be joined by Malcolm Nance, who many of you will know of already. I'll get him to introduce himself, though, more formally in his own words. We were just talking before we turned on the live, that we wake up every morning the sense of anxiety as to what crazy crap happened last night. And today is no different. And indeed, we had Steve Witkoff, one of the main negotiators on behalf of the Kremlin, I would argue, negotiating. But he talked to Tucker Carlson, of all people, last night or yesterday, and was just streaming continual pro-Russian propaganda, and it's like, yeah, that's fulfilled my anxiety for the day. So anyway, that's the day that we've woken up to, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this as we're going to talk about many other things. Malcolm, thank you so much for coming on. I've just worn one of my Canadian pieces of apparel in honor of you being in Canada, and you're no longer in Canada, and I feel rather silly, but thank you for coming on and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, and I was in Montreal yesterday. I had been there all week and returned across the dangerous U.S.-Canadian border crossing at Laval, and came to my house. I'm literally just hours from Montreal. I can commute if I had really wanted to. But let me give you a little background of those of you who don't know me, which I find just utterly amazing. I am former U.S. Naval Intelligence cryptology. As a matter of fact, I was a cryptologic linguist. For those of you who don't know, we always make this joke because we have a lot of these pro-Moscow detractors who come on there and they say, "Oh, cryptology is not intelligence, right? You're just a linguist." Yeah, like Alan Turing was just a linguist, right? A German linguist. It didn't do anything. So anyway, it's cryptology is the highest form of intelligence we have in the United States, and I worked for as a naval cryptologist. For the National Security Agency. And I retired as a senior chief petty officer, for those of you who know, senior enlisted. And for those people who go, "Oh, you weren't an officer," well, officers.
There's something weird going on with the sound. I can't hear you. Hello, can you hear me? No. Something strange has gone on. I'm going to jump out and come back in.
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, now you're back.
That's something really bizarre just happened. Anyway, yeah, I was listening to
the Russians.
What you were saying. Yeah, it is. I bet they're on me. They
are. So like I said, I was an intelligence contractor. I left the military. Interesting fact, during my last 4 years in the military, I was a survival, evasion, resistance, and escape school instructor, where I ran the terrorism survival program for the U.S. Navy, which was fun. Then did the same job for an awful lot more money as an intelligence contractor, and then became the counterterrorism and intelligence analyst for MSNBC and NBC News. Did that for several years, and in January of 2022, I went to Ukraine to do the analysis of the coming Russian invasion, fell in love with Ukraine, and then I flew out on the evening, hours before Russia attacked Ukraine. I had a family matter to attend to, and I thought the invasion would happen a week earlier. And as I was landing in Dublin, the attack started. And then I went to my home in New York, gathered all of the military equipment I had from decades of contracting. I had enough equipment to provide a platoon. Flew back to Ukraine after being vetted by the Ukrainian Defense Forces in Washington, and they wanted me in the International Legion. So I went back, joined the International Legion, but was first assigned to Ministry of Defense Intelligence, GUR. And after a few months of doing whatever it was I did with GUR, because we don't talk about that, I helped form their paramilitary force, and then went over to 1st Battalion International Legion in Kharkiv, on the Kharkiv front, took over as their battalion intelligence officer, and then transferred over to 3rd Battalion International Legion, which is their special missions, special operations battalion, and carried out operations against Russia during the Kharkiv counteroffensive in 2022. So all told, about a year, 10 months, and in Ukraine, in the International Legion, and then went back to the United States to lobby for Ukraine. In fact, was part of a working group that worked with the White House and the National Security Council supporting Ukraine as the only legionnaire that none of them had ever met. They met one or two Ukrainian army soldiers, but none had ever met an actual American that went to fight.
Well, there's an interesting thing there, because when you look at the Oval Office fracas that happened, and you have JD Vance being put on the spot by Zelensky quite beautifully. It's like, have you been to Ukraine? And he's like, I've seen some videos. And
Yeah.
actually, I
Telegram,
think,
right?
yeah, exactly. And you think that although the comeback to Zelensky was like, we don't want these propaganda tours, you are naturally going to do that. If you're in charge of a nation, you're at war, you're going to show people around to generate empathy and sympathy for your cause, right? So
Right.
that is going to happen. But I really do think some of these people, from Steve Witkoff to Marco Rubio to JD Vance, need to get their asses to Ukraine and actually experience what it's like. And the fact is, Trump needs to go there to understand that it's not all rubble. Like he keeps saying, just the lies that keep perpetuating are really frustrating.
His constant refrain that Ukraine is an utterly destroyed country on the verge of collapse. The Russian army is victorious along the battlefield everywhere. And I'm constantly on air, on podcasts, TV and radio. Some of my favorite times is going on LBC.
Yeah.
Out of London, and the pro-Trump, pro-Moscow Brits come on there and go, that guy's lying. It's like, no. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and plenty of Brits are in the International Legion. The first regimental, or not regimental, but battalion sergeant major, wonderful guy there, call sign Jedi, Brit. Now he's a murderous killer in 3rd Battalion International Legion. They're just everywhere, and they're buying houses in Kharkiv. Okay, I mean, opening nightclubs, whatever. And you go, that country is 18 hours long. If you were to drive nonstop, where's the furthest south in Britain? Torquay, right?
Yeah. Good
And
call.
Torquay all the way up to the
That.
Faroes, you still wouldn't cross as much. I think you do that in 12 hours. But in Ukraine, so huge, 18 hours nonstop driving at 120 kilometers per hour. And the war is in the last 30 minutes of that in the southeastern part of the country. And most of it's really in the places they seized in 2018, which is 2014, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, plus a part of Zaporizhia and parts of Kherson province. That's the war, back to what it was almost. And Trump and those people live in an alternate reality. They do not read, consume, or care about U.S. intelligence whatsoever.
Okay, this is one of the core areas I want to talk about, actually, because I did a whole video yesterday on whether Trump is an agent, an asset, useful idiot, or aligned with. And my answer is yes. Yes, he is. All of those.
All of the above.
and some of them feed into the other. So if you are aligned, you're more susceptible to be manipulated. So if he's aligned with Putin because he wants to be Putin, that's his kind of alignment, and he wants he's maybe seeing things in terms of imperialism from the 1900s or whatever, then that makes him a really vulnerable target for Russian disinformation and activity, etc., etc. But the idea is that he keeps regurgitating Russian talking points, and he doesn't read. He's fundamentally lacking in knowledge of geopolitics, history, geography. And so from an intelligence point of view, what would be going on with like the CIA and military intelligence, where you're thinking, right, we know this stuff, but he's saying the opposite, and he's therefore saying things that are against what we have been leading towards. But then you've got to purge of those agencies. So talk me through like what's going on in the White House.
Well, first off, you need to understand that when you talk about what relationship Donald Trump has to Russia, I've written 4 New York Times top 10 bestsellers on this story, right? Starting with the plot to hack America in 2016. My best work, I think, was the plot to destroy democracy, right? How Putin's spies were destabilizing America and dismantling the West. Where I go over piece by piece how Russia, Putin and United Russia have relationships with every right-wing extremist political group in Europe. And in the United States, they co-opted the right-wing evangelicals. They co-opted the alt-right. They had practically helped invent the alt-right. In fact, Steve Bannon, Trump's close advisor, who was a disciple of Alexander Dugin, openly said that, he wanted to destroy government and, essentially realign the West along Dugin's belief of multipolarity, that Russia would have Europe be the principal power in the East, the United States would be the principal ally in the West as part of its, what I called the axis of autocrats. So as I wrote those books, my third one, The Plot to Betray America, How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies. And the worst part is that the second part of my subtitle was, and how you can fix it. Well, there ain't no fixing it now, right? This guy started out as a target. In 1977, Russian intelligence tasked the Czech intelligence agency, the STB, when Trump married Ivana Trump, who was a woman from behind the Iron Curtain, hot Eastern European woman. He married her, and she started calling home, sending letters, sending telegrams and messages. And the Czech intelligence agency, the subordinate agency to the KGB, monitored Donald Trump, his family, and kids, Ivanka, Eric, Don Jr., when they would come over to Czechoslovakia, right? In that period. From 1977 to 1987, 10 years of constant surveillance. So
I interviewed Zarina Zabriskie just the other day, and we talked about this. So just to give you the context.
Oh, great. Well, then you know all about it, right? Because I get MAGA right-wingers who attack me all the time. Go, you're a liar. Trump was never with the other side. And it's like, I never said that he was an agent from 1977. I'm an intelligence professional. I know the tiers of cooperation. But when they have you as a target from 1977 to 1987, they have 10 years of human intelligence collection against you, signals intelligence collection, all the phone calls. They know pictures of your kids. They know how they behave. They know what they said to you in every phone call you've ever made. Because the reporting authority to Czech intelligence was Ivana Trump's father. Because he lived behind the Iron Curtain. They told him he will get that information. They tapped the phones. They read the emails or read the letters and everything. And he had to report on what Donald Trump was doing because he was a rich American. And when you're talking about flipping somebody, you have to gain a lot of information. Then in 1988, he decided he wanted to run for president. KGB knew this before he had said anything to anyone in America, that he was considering running against George Herbert Walker Bush, because Ivana called her father. and said Donald wanted to do this. So when they started to approach him, when Gorbachev mania in the United States, Gorby mania started happening, and Trump was like mad crazy to meet Gorbachev, and he took out a full-time New York Times article demanding that he be made the nuclear weapons reduction treaty negotiator for the START II treaties. And that he was a brilliant person. You know, at that time he was thinking of, I should get a Nobel Peace Prize. Now put a pin in that, right? That
Because
comes
I
back
think
a
that still
lot.
is so relevant now.
It
Like, he
comes back
talks
a
about
lot,
nuclear all the time at the moment, and that's
all
what
the
I
time.
think is at the back of it.
It's the back of his head, this thing that he was not recognized. And so he goes to the Soviet Union in 1988 with his Czech wife. He's put into, you know, he's wined and dined. He's under 1,000% surveillance, not 100, 1,000% surveillance. It was organized by Intertor, the KGB travel agency. He was in a KGB hotel. The room was wired for everything, right? I mean, they know more about Donald Trump's sex habits than his wives do. So it's just one of those crazy things. And they wine him and dine him, and he realized brutalist style of Moscow was never going to cut it for him. So he had no interest in. He wanted to put in a Trump Tower, but couldn't do it at that time. Boom. Fast forward, Soviet Union falls. Vladimir Putin becomes president after Boris Yeltsin, and Trump starts in 2008 attacking Barack Obama. And of course, he comes up on Russia's radar. So at this point, he goes from a target, right, to attacking the American president. And that's when the Russians would look at him and go, hey, this guy's he's a fellow traveler. He's saying what we say. And when we say something, he mimics what we say. So let's keep saying things for him. He becomes a fellow traveler. Not hard ideologically, but ideologically in that Russia is now full of money. Russia has hot chicks. Russia has a leader who is a dictator who mass murders his enemies. And they take notice of this. Moving on, where he proposes to do Miss Universe in Moscow in 2012. And he comes there and he is all about Trump Tower Moscow now. Years of development to do $1 billion building. He would call Trump Tower in Moscow. Would have a 2-story penthouse suite at the top that he intended to, get this, bribe Vladimir Putin with. You're going to try to bribe one of the richest, secretly one of the richest men in the world, right? It shows the level of naivety. And of course, Putin must have literally, pissed himself laughing, getting off the floor and doing it all over again, imagining. And that's when he realized this man is going to be not just a target, we're going to develop him. I went to Vladimir Putin's office when he was a baby spy. He was a junior spy in Dresden. And I sat around there and I talked to the woman who recovered the building and how they had to take microphones out of every windowsill, every door sill, and every toilet stall, right? But Putin lived in that environment. And according to his Stasi file, he was a very ardent believer in the art of flipping people, right? Making human intelligence officers. Other KGB officers were there to drink beer and eat freaking sausage, not Vladimir Putin. He was a human manipulator. So he sees Trump as this target in 2012. He arranges the 12 richest oligarchs in Russia meet with Trump at Miss Universe at the Nobu restaurant, and he sends his personal financial representative. Trump is mad crazy to meet Putin. Putin keeps promising and promising and promising, but never shows, right? But sends envoys. And now Trump is like, he's going to be my best friend. We saw several times in the run-up to the campaign that he lied multiple times that he had met Putin. Because in his mind, he wanted to be next to greatness as he saw it. Greatness to him is unlimited amounts of oligarch money and hot Russian chicks, right? And I don't make that comment about Russian women glibly. That is a consistent theme amongst right-wing extremists and conservatives. You might recall the buying Russian wives craze back in the early 1990s, right? Women would come over and marry these huge fat American guys and then run off with some guy from the Russian Alpha team that moved to Miami, right? And take their fat American husband's money. And it even worked when the KGB or the FSB put a spy into the right-wing extremist world with Maria Butina, right?
Yeah.
As part of the, what is it, Right to Bear Arms group from Russia. All of this works, right? Their honeypotting works. So Russia invades Ukraine in 2014, and Trump is now primed. He does not, everybody in the world is criticizing Russia. Trump says he is a strong leader with strong faith, and he's better than Barack Obama. And Putin now knows he has the hook in this man. And that's when the one-to-one human intelligence manipulation happens. And more importantly, I know that for targets like this, and I've been around operations like this, they wield all the wheelbarrows of collection on Donald Trump into Vladimir Putin's office, right? And said, leave it to me. And Putin probably poured over psychological studies of Donald Trump, poured over the best blackmail surveillance he got, the videos where he's banging Ivana in Moscow. Just when you're going to target an individual at this level, that you may, in fact, be able to create the literal Manchurian candidate, right? Or as I call him, the Siberian candidate.
And you could
with
throw
this.
in some extra nuggets. So the two I always talk about is when he took out full page adverts for $130,000 in these broadsheets in the US about
Yeah.
how against NATO. Like, why would a real estate
Right.
mogul in 1987 take out adverts against NATO? And then
Yeah.
in 2008, he sold a mansion at 2.32 times
That's right.
times the value of what it was to a Russian
Oligarch, right?
oligarch
Who promptly tore it down, who leveled the
right.
ground, right? That sale of I believe he bought it for 24 million, put it up for 48 million, sold it for 92 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
It's like,
and you're like,
reel them in,
why?
baby.
How does that happen? What is going on there? So why would a Russian pay over the odds for something, like massively over the odds, unless he just wanted to get money to Trump?
Right. And every oligarch had an FSB officer on staff. Putin made it clear that you are always going to have somebody who is a watchkeeper, who is a political commissar from me on your staff. So now, in 2015, Russia executes what I called Operation Lucky Seven, which the FBI called a much cooler name of, it'll come to me in a moment. It's that Rolling Stones song. But this operation to manipulate the 2016 election by hacking the Democratic National Committee, executing Russian-originated Watergate, because that's what Watergate was, right? Breaking into the DNC offices, reading their messages, finding out who works for them, and doing that. And when I heard about this in late 2015, I believe it was October 2015, when the first indications were they had been hacked, my immediate thought was Russian Watergate, because they had determined it was, ATP 28, ATP 29, Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, site, hacking suites that had gone in there. And it could only be done for one reason, which is to benefit and candidate against Hillary Clinton. And that was Donald Trump. And then when Putin said in late 20 or in December 2015 that he liked Donald Trump and viewed him as a colorful, interesting character, it was Trump bait, right? And then at that point, Whirlwind Tour, everything was done to elect Donald Trump president. And that's
Crossfire Hurricane.
Crossfire Hurricane. Yes. Cool name. I mean, I was so angry.
Jumping Jack Flash. Yeah.
Jumping Jack Flash. And the worst part is I had just published Plot to Hack America 6 weeks before the election. And like all intelligence operations, you have to give it a cool name. And I had to call it Lucky Seven. And it would only be a year later we would find out it was called Crossfire Hurricane. And I was so mad. It's such a cool name. But what I understood is that by choosing that name, They understood the severity of what was happening and this and how the sensitivity of what was happening. The difference is Russia, the FSB, Vladimir Putin don't give two flying flips about the United States and what's going on. The FBI had to play by the rules to look out for the interests of the United States. So, all of this being said, Trump went from a target to a fellow traveler. By 2012, he was becoming an unwitting asset, right? He knew where money was coming in, he knew that they liked him. By 2016, he went from an unwitting asset. When I went on MSNBC 2 days before he begged Russia for their assistance, and I was the first person in US news media to come out and openly say it. The United States was under an attack by a foreign power, a foreign hostile intelligence agency to elect a preferred candidate, president of the United States, by hacking, stealing, and attacking the United States. And brother, I got to tell you, the number of people that called me insane was legion. The death threats went off the charts. And then 48 hours later, Trump comes up and goes, Russia, if you're listening, please give me Hillary Clinton's emails. And it's like he said, Malcolm Nance doesn't get enough props. So he came out and confessed everything.
You got Paul Manafort, then you get
Paul Manafort giving the Russians campaign information. At that moment, Donald Trump became a witting asset. He knew Russia was working for him. He was coordinating and cooperating with Russia. That does not make him an agent. An agent is a person who is openly betraying their country's interests for a financial inducement, monetary ideology, coercion, co-option, or ego and excitement.
There's a bit interesting bit of linguistics we could play here, where he might not be an agent, but he has agency now. Do you know what I mean? He's not an agent, but he's deciding to do things.
Agent fever, right?
Yeah.
Like he wants to be an agent, and he wants to transition. Right?
Like he knows enough. Like there are compromises with Russia, and he's choosing to do things in line with Russia that and effectively for them with some kind of knowledge. There must be, and so therefore it's not like they've come to him, tasked him with doing something, and he sits in an office and they're paying him like some bung of a bunch of money in an envelope.
Right. No, he's literally the kind of person okay, I'm not a dedicated human intelligence person. I'm a signals intelligence person that worked human intelligence missions jointly. And it's like if someone were to be banging on the door of the safe house going, pick me, right? A good human officer would be like, whoa, Slick, you way too much want to be in this game. With Putin reeled him in so nicely and kept throwing him extra bits of bait and everything through all this time that Trump goes, I want to be your friend. I want to be your ally, your buddy. I agree with everything you say.
I want to be you.
I want to be you, but I still want to be subordinate to you because I know you're a badass, and I can't be a badass the way you're a badass. I can't throw people into the furnace in the basement of 10 Dzerzhinsky Square, which, by the way, Vladimir Putin renovated that building, the old KGB headquarters. Hey, by the way, here's a good, funny story. Here is how, when Putin became the director of the FSB, first director of the FSB, how it transitioned from the KGB to the FSB. So he sits in his office, he has a cup of tea, and at 9 o'clock that morning, a guy comes up from maintenance, right? And he takes a screwdriver and he removes the letters K and G, and then puts up the letters F and S, and then leaves. That's it. That's the KGB transmission to the FSB, right? But Putin gave them $1 billion budget overnight. Right? They understood the power of the intelligence that was still left in the archives that the Americans hadn't compromised, like understanding and manipulating world leaders. So for Putin, this was a fun job. I mean, it would be like putting me in charge of U.S. intelligence. I'd have a blast, right? And I would be doing things for the benefit of my country. Putin understood that this guy would be doing things for the benefit of Russia, and that he has always been a fellow traveler. And now it's time to transition him into an ally. And Moscow has thoroughly manipulated Trump. Trump has chosen people in his cabinet, every one of whom believes whatever the boss believes. Tulsi Gabbard is director of national intelligence. I said this, I tweeted this yesterday.
That blows
we
my
will
mind.
have to throw out everything for the last 4 years and assume every mission is compromised. We have to assume it now.
On the one hand, I think that the money that Russia has spent on the war in Ukraine is so obscenely stupid. And now, because it was a mistake, they wanted a special military operation. It accidentally turned into a war 3 days later. And then they got stuck in a war they're not planned for. And so therefore, that's where it all went wrong, right? Which is, and I want to ask you about the intelligence. How does that go that wrong? But anyway, like they spend all this money on a war when actually, if they'd taken all of that money and then invested that in troll farms and bot farms and influence operations in the United States, they could achieve, like, imagine all that money applied to influence operations, given what they've achieved with the budgets they already have.
Nearly $1 trillion. Well, you have to understand something. And if you really want to read about how this was done, you have to read my book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, because that's where I do a deep dive in. And you should understand that as an intelligence professional, I'm looking at it from the intelligence community in how a foreign intelligence organization would have to do these operations. And the fingerprints were everywhere, like fingerprints. It was like spray paint on all the walls. The Russians had developed the Gerasimov doctrine of information warfare a decade before, right? And how they were going to use it to manipulate entire populations into essentially surrendering to a foreign power and viewing them as real allies, as rescuers in many instances. And I got into it with, of all people, a journalist by the name of Matt Taibbi, right? Who is a big Moscow shill. And he used to be a renowned journalist at Rolling Stone. And then we found out that he had been in Russia during the raging Yeltsin years, where he was, misabusing Russian girlfriends and writing up all sorts of stupid stuff, and fell in love with what he thought Russia was. He missed the whole Putin KGB era, right, or FSB era. So, but that guy, when I wrote about this, and when my every one of my books reached the top 10 in the New York Times, at times they should never have been in the top 10 in the New York Times, like midsummer, right? When you're reading summer light reading, and here's this book about how the FSB literally bought European conservatism. And he got angry in the middle of one of these summer reads. I guess he must have found it on a beach or something. And he goes, "How dare you say this about Russia? I lived there. What's your source that the Russians manipulated the populations, and that they had a strategy for all this? And this bullshit Gerasimov doctrine thing you're talking about." And I go, "Is this an interview? Are you asking me this as a question? Or are you asking me this as a guy who spent a lot of time in Russian hooker bars, right? And is really unhappy that I've spoiled your image of a pure nation with hot chicks that just like us because we have money, or you have money?" Or so he comes back and he goes, "If you want this to be an interview, I can make it like a threat, like I'm going to expose you for the fraud that you are." And I said, "Well, I found this in this obscure document called the NATO Handbook on Russian Information Warfare. It's on page 1, right? Where they outline that you can download the entire thing in PDF right now, because NATO was way ahead of this when the Russians were carrying out what I called Web War One, when they were attacking Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Ukraine with disinformation, misinformation. You might recall when they attacked Estonia, the Estonians took down a statue at a war grave cemetery to Soviet troops, and they shut the nation down using a denial of service attack.
Finnish journalist Jessica Aro has a great book called Russia's Trolls, and she talks a lot about the Nordics, but also It's amazing. It's an amazing book.
Mm,
And it talks about the Baltics being at the forefront of the information war and how they've been dealing with it for years,
that's right.
ahead of the game. But yeah, like disinformation
What
is such a massive issue.
Well, Web War
What?
One is what I called it. And now when he attacked the United States, I personally think what I call Web War Two started with something you might remember, Brexit and the Scottish referendum. It
Yeah.
turns out that the St. Petersburg trolls had started as an experiment with the Scottish referendum, and then went full, cyber balls to the wall with
Mm,
Brexit. And it was
yeah.
so subtle and insidious you didn't even notice it. Now you notice it. I mean,
Yeah.
I hope you noticed it yesterday when they burned your substation down and shut down your
Well,
largest airport. So
yeah, I'm undecided. I mean, information seems to be that was
maybe.
not. But then I've been saying, Malcolm, for a couple of years now, literally a couple of years of doing this. I've been doing this almost 3 years now, following this war and reporting on it. And I said 2 years ago, fire is going to be the weapon of choice. You're seeing it in Russia by the Ukrainians using it, by paying people very little money, very low risk, burn things, relay stations, whatever. And Russians doing it in Ukraine, getting young kids to do it, and all sorts. And then across Europe, you got the IKEA store, the Polish mall. Like, why create a bomb where you're blowing yourself up in your own living room when you can just get some fiery stuff and then burn shit down? So
My
that's
my first book I ever published was called The Terrorist Recognition Handbook. And it goes through it. It's an encyclopedia of how terrorists do their operations. It was used all throughout the United States government. I'm sure they cut off the sales now to the CIA, but this year. But for a very, very long time, it was a standard handbook in U.S. government intelligence, unclassified. And the first terrorist tactic is the simplest. Arson is
awesome.
always the simplest form of terrorism. Always. Takes a big lighter or a match and a candle or a matchbook and a cigarette, all those old techniques, which we outline in there, right? But fire is always arson is always the simplest form of
So
terrorism.
simple, it's so effective. Look, before we get on to talk about the South African oligarchs, which I think is
Oh,
part of this alignment stuff, and I know you got some stuff to say on that,
yeah.
and that is fascinating. I just want to talk about intelligence in the CIA and
Mm,
American intelligence, because I want to understand, as someone that's kind of been in there, what happens when the top is compromised so much. So Tulsi Gabbard is compromised, and then maybe a few people at the top, maybe there's a purging of the DOD, some of these top 4-star generals and whatnot. But what happens when most of the people who are operating and have been probably for 10, 20 years, right,
career officers, yeah.
yeah, career officers are like, we know damn well that Russia are the bad guys, and now we're being told to do stuff that is a complete 180 flip. What
Right.
goes on? Do these people try and still operate normally and then keep the Tulsi Gabbards at an arm's length? Or, like, when you've got Steve Witkoff, Tulsi Gabbard, all these people mouthing off pro-Russian stuff, like, how does that jive with these people?
Yeah. Okay. And this is an important question. I'm glad you asked that. If a foreign intelligence agency is trying to penetrate your operations, 99% of the time, what they are not trying to get is your day-to-day collection. All right. What they really want is an access to your sources and methods, right? The technologies that is getting something. I mean, day-to-day ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, which is military speak for the stuff that we collect every day, right? British RC-135 flights out of Mildenhall. Well, we know they occur every day. We know they occur. The only difference is for 70 years, they were American reconnaissance flights out of Mildenhall on C-707s or old RC-135 Alphas, right? Back in the 50s and the 60s. And the only thing that's changed is the British bought a RC-135 whiskey, and you're flying the missions now, which is good because you don't have to depend on us when
Well,
we
yeah, that's
decide
a
to
whole
screw
other
you, right?
discussion. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
but no, it's a good thing, right? They're having that SIGINT capability out of there. Or when you retired your Nimrods, I worked closely at
Yeah.
one point with your Nimrod R1 Nimrod reconnaissance aircraft. But those things happen every day, right?
Yeah.
You are constantly in a vacuum cleaner collection mode where intelligence is learning something, then constantly cross-referencing it against the day-to-day activities of the world. And if it stays constant, right? Backfire bombers fly from Engels to a repair facility in Siberia, or MiG-31 fighter foxhounds take off on routine training flights in order to get their hours, or do they have a special capability that only comes up? Those things should be going on every day, right? And you should be doing this. You should be sleeping on your terminal, as we call it, right? Or you should be going to the cafeteria to get another coffee or popcorn or the hot dog machine, whatever it is. That's called day-to-day intelligence collection capability. The only difference is we all do it. Everybody does it, right? Everyone does routine training. And you can always extrapolate information based on what you know. For example, I get people who constantly say, "Oh, well, this is super duper secret." Well, if you're a British Airways aircraft, right? I'm going to tell you some things I can tell you before Heathrow reopens. If you're a British Airways aircraft, you are going to be going on a scheduled flight at a scheduled time in a scheduled place. And you're going to be trying to take off on time. You're going to turn engines on time. And certain things are going to happen in sequence. One, it is not the jetway coming down and the guys pulling chocks. It's going to be a week before or a month before, where a planning board determines your schedule, your flight, your loadout, your fuel state, aircraft maintenance, aircraft availability, right? And then are there going to be what's the total number of seats, number of passengers, number of air crew, pilots flying in pilots who may be there as secondary crew, and what altitude are you going to fly at? What boxes are you allowed to go through? Are you going to have any NOTAMs that notice to all mariners that you're going to, or missions that you're going to avoid? That happens way in advance. Okay, that's where the intelligence process begins. The intelligence does not start with you, pilots going from the coffee, right, down to the jetway and turning over the engines. It does not. That's the end of the mission. Now, I know all of this is going to happen, right? Because that's where I'm collecting. I'm collecting at the far end, which we call down or upstream, way the hell upstream. And then I know by not doing nothing that if I were to look down at 9:04 a.m., I should be seeing British Airways flight blah, 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 taking off and going nonstop to JFK, right? I know that's going to happen. As you collect over a day-to-day basis, this becomes very routine. When it's not routine is when I do this, right? I'm sitting back with my coffee, and then I have to go, oh, I have to put my coffee cup down. That is what we are really looking for, which is the anomalies in the system. And so if I get Speedbird 705, which is every British Airways flight is a Speedbird, and he starts taking off and he goes off over Heathrow, and he starts heading towards Shannon. And this, by the way, actually happened to me, not on a British Airways flight, on a US military flight. And then he declares an emergency or declares a return and has to land at Shannon due to passenger illness. I had a child next to me that had full respiratory arrest at 33,000 feet. And I had to force them to land the aircraft in Shannon, Ireland. It's when the plane turns around and he goes, and the guy goes, Heathrow, this is, or Shannon, this is Speedbird 705. I'm declaring an emergency. We have a starboard engine fire. Well, that's when everybody starts leaning up in their chairs, right? Hitting buttons. Because is it a normal emergency? Is it like Air India? I can't remember the name of that aircraft where it blows up in midair? Is it like Pan Am Flight 70 or 103 where it blows up over Scotland? Do I have a normal in-flight emergency? A decompression in that aircraft? Do I have a drunk ass passenger? I had that, by the way, on an Emirates flight. Rowdy drunk English. Indian guy who starts a fight.
All right, Indian guy.
Now, yeah, full bottle of whiskey. So, literally a fist fight up and down the aisles. So All of these things, it is the anomaly I'm looking for. So when I see a MiG-31 take off, or your flight, your RC-135 sees a MiG-31 Foxhound take off out of Joe Blosky Airport, and starts heading in at 37,000 feet, and has and moves out of a training track, I will probably already have known that he has a Kinzhal missile on board, that he has a special mission. He starts he starts afterburning it towards the Ukrainian border. I'm gonna call shenanigans, right? I'm gonna say I have a hostile aircraft conducting a missile strike. At that point, you go boop, right, goes down to NATO's intelligence fusion center. They pass that on to their liaison officer in Ukraine. He gets a call at Ukrainian land warfare, or Ukrainian armed forces headquarters. They're already in air defense mode because they know that a Foxhound is taking off on a missile strike profile. Now, I personally have been clear to none of this, but this is how the world works. It's how the world works. From Vietnam War to World War II, firing V1, buzz bombs at London. This is how the intelligence process works. And then, of course, you hit a button, all the sirens go off all over the Ukraine. They start putting the little color markers where the missile's strike range could go to. And if it's not past Kyiv or Rivne, they'll leave Western Ukraine off, and all of Eastern Ukraine will go to air defense mode. That's how the intelligence process works. Now, if you shut off some aspects of, like, the US has advanced sensors that we can get very advanced intelligence, like, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, like that week's strike, strike report. If you shut that off, you're telling the Ukrainians, yeah, we're pretty much going to let you get attacked, and you'll know it the minute the missiles come into your air defense zone, and you can detect it by radar.
So, although I haven't quite answered that question, digression here, because
Yes.
I've been wondering what it is that the US provide that Zelensky's so desperate for. And I've been saying this the last couple of days. So Zelensky definitely wants to keep the US on side. And what is it? So there is not military aid, because that's kind of whittling down, and there's only some PDA stuff left, and the US are probably not going to spend the rest of that, etc., etc. So it's not really military aid. It's going to be intelligence. It could be sanctions. It could be this. But I think my speculation is that the one thing that the US has that no one else can do is some kind of ballistic missile intelligence, such that if the US was to turn it off, so if the US wasn't on the side of Ukraine, then Kyiv is suddenly naked. And if Kyiv is suddenly naked, then that's the end of Ukraine being able to put up.
Let me tell you, I've fought in the Ukrainian army. I've conducted intelligence. My favorite part, by the way, of being in intelligence in Ukraine was that we had a kid who was literally mentally ill, and he defected. He calls it defected to Russia. He was actually kicked out of the army, and then went to Istanbul, was kicking around Istanbul, and said, "Hey, why don't I go on the Russian side and tell them that I know all sorts of secrets?" And so this kid who was in our battalion, who we took off the line because he was nuts, um, went to Russia and said, yes, there was a US intelligence officer who had secret satellite phones and receiving direct calls from the CIA headquarters. And I had to supervise this moron, right, as part of the cleaning party. And the most insulting part of what he said, which was all bullshit. I mean, I would have loved having a direct chat phone to freaking Langley. But that's not where the information really comes from, right? The worst part was he forgot my name. He called me Michael. And I'm really upset with that because he was all over Russian TV.
Oh, we've lost him. Oh, you're back again. Hang on,
Russian
I can't hear you. Oh, there, you're back. You're back.
Okay. And I had already been on Russian state TV 3 times. So I was like, this is it. This is the big time. They're gonna go, it's that Malcolm Nance guy that Olga Skabeva reported on. He's the super spy. No, the guy forgot my name. So the point is, there is some intelligence the United States provides that is sort of unique. I'm not going to get into it, but none of it is existential. None of it. You could turn it all off today and it would not be existential. France just launched a satellite with those capabilities. And there, and you have
Interesting.
to understand, France has a national nuclear ballistic missile arsenal based on strike aircraft that can be carried by strike aircraft like the Rafale. They used to have that huge giant Mirage. I can't remember which designation of it was, but the Mirage penetration strike nuclear bomber. And don't forget, they have ballistic missile launching submarines.
Yeah.
So France needs its own strategic level space-based sensors to determine whether ballistic missile launch 705 from base in prostitutes province is actually being launched at the United States. By the way, this is actually a joke name we used. Was being launched at the United States, or is it on a southwestern course to blow up Paris? They need to know that. So it's independent of the United States. So Ukraine will get that intelligence.
Well, what does explain then why Zelensky's so desperate to keep the US on side? Well, what is it?
I think very easy. If you watch the movie with Gary Oldman as Churchill,
right? Yeah, Darkest Hours.
The Darkest Hours. Love that film. Love that film. The drama of his decision making. And when he got the phone call, he was talking to FDR, and FDR's like, well, I can't really help you. I've got Congress to deal with. And Churchill puts that phone down like, we are royally, can you use obscenities here? I don't know.
Go for it.
We are royally, most royally fucked here. We are like full on King George fucked. Then he hung that phone up like, we are alone at the darkest hour. Right? And I got to keep my freaking straight face on this thing. Zelensky's there. When he walked out of that office in Washington, he realized we're royally fucked. All right? We're going to lose everything from the United States. It was not about keeping the weapons that the United States was sending. We are not sending proportionately the weapon systems that we need, that Ukraine needs to survive. That is now coming from that Rheinmetall artillery plant that they built in Ukraine. That's where your shells are coming from. These collections around the world. It was about keeping the American people on side and not turning Donald Trump into what Zelensky had already understood. Trump personally hates him. Personally.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%.
Because he got impeached over not creating a fake investigation of Joe Biden. So from that point onward, it was always going to be Trump was going to cut off the weapons to Ukraine. It was always going to be that.
Absolutely agree.
This is the Churchill phone call hanging it up.
So it's more of a kind of morale sense of, or sense of, it's almost like not tangible. It's not a tangible thing then.
Yeah, but it's worse. If I were having to do an assessment based on what I know, and I'm not a human intelligence guy, right? But I've dealt with them, and and human intelligence officers I know would be working in the psychology of this thing, right? Like, get us an assessment of how this man's thinking. Zelensky naturally knows this. He comes from a country that before the war was pretty horribly corrupt. Now, during the war, is pretty damn clean, right? No one is allowed to be corrupt in Ukraine when they're losing thousands of people and civilians in cities at a time. That's what I loved about Ukraine, man. They turned on a dime and they love each other and they will fight with rocks and sticks. Zelensky, on the other hand, has to keep the American people to keep the pressure. And I think the one thing he was most concerned about with is something that I'm concerned about, something many people in the United States are concerned about. Will Trump become an ally of Russia in this war to assist them to force the surrender of Ukraine?
Yeah, so that's the key because the American people are a means to an end. What is the end? The end is prevailing in the war, right? Or winning or whatever, however you want to.
Real victory. Real
Yeah,
victory, not
yeah.
surrender of a third of their country, or 20% of their country.
So therefore, like, why he needs the US on side is because actually, so what you seem to be saying, and I don't disagree at all, is that they need America on side, because if they're not on side, they're on the other side. If you're not with us, you're against us.
Right.
So
Well,
that is,
with Trump, there's no neutrality. It's the United States joining and aligning with Moscow, lifting the sanctions. If that doesn't happen in the next month, I will be horribly shocked.
well, they just talked about it yesterday. So Europeans have come out and reported that they are already no longer meeting with working groups that are looking to close loopholes and enforce the sanctions. So in other
Right.
words, they are de facto releasing sanctions. They're not actually taking sanctions off, they're just not enforcing them. But
Well,
okay,
I mean,
which is terrible.
Europe has,
Would
there's
be
another
terrible.
factor here for Europe. If they keep sanctions on and the United States lifts sanctions, every bank in the United States is going to be sanctioned. The trade between the United States and Europe by law will have to be that they will have to start cutting ties or sanctioning those US entities.
But here's where it gets more complicated still, because the problem is sanctions work when everyone does them, right? And then you have a safety by living in a society whose government is sanctioning, because actually we're on a disadvantage by sanctioning because everyone's sanctioning. The fewer people that sanction, it's actually, so if only the EU and Europe, EU plus are sanctioning, then that's a disadvantage for Europe, because the US then gets a competitive advantage because they can use Russian banking, transactions, hydrocarbons, and everything else.
Yes,
and things come down, prices go up for Europe.
But Europe can make that so freaking painful for the United States
I would hope so.
By literally saying, I'm sorry, Citibank, we can no longer do business with you. You can no longer do business in Europe. That cuts America's life. That cuts America's line anywhere. So what? You're getting access to a few tens of billions of Russian money. You would have gotten that anyway through Dubai. Now what we're talking about is you're going to lose European business. Yes, there may be some pain.
There's a full then economic war between Europe and
we're
America
there.
at that stage. Yeah,
These people in Washington, by the way, this isn't America. It's the Trump regime are already there. I want to get back to that analogy of Gary Oldman as Churchill. When Churchill hung that phone up with FDR, this is the difference between what's happening today and then. When he hung that phone up and FDR was like, well, sorry, we can't help you. And he's staring at the phone with all the gravitas and drama of Britain is fucked. He didn't know that when he hung that phone up, FDR turned to his advisors and said, we're going to break every damn law and skirt everything right up to the limit to help Britain. U.S. Army pilots, you're all on leave. You can go to Britain and fly in the RAF Eagle Squadron. What? There's a shitload of old destroyers? Well, we're going to scrap those. Why don't you take these for scrap and pay us at the end of the war? And U.S. production for ammunition and everything suddenly skyrockets. The difference between then, that phone call, which, by the way, I didn't appreciate that they screwed FDR over like that, because FDR really did come through for Britain. And the Zelensky thing is Trump hung up the phone or left the Oval Office and said, we're going to screw Ukraine out of everything. We're going to cut off ammunition.
As a
we're going to cut off
retribution
intelligence as retribution. He doesn't like me. He didn't say thank you. Fuck Ukraine. Let's start working with Moscow. They have hot chicks and loads of money. And I keep bringing that up because it is a constant theme throughout Republican politics about Russian women and Russian money. The ultimate lure.
Yeah. Yes. I want to go back to this idea. Could you just? So the question was, what happens when the U.S. intelligence bigwigs and Pete Hegseth and all these people appear to be fully pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine? What happens inside the intelligence operations? So, is there a tension? Are people going to have to? Is there going to be a reaction from within?
This takes you back to your original question about what happens in the cycle. The cycle continues. All right, but here's what you can do. If you're Joseph Blow, this is one thing people don't understand about the intelligence world. I get people who go, I was in intelligence. I know you were a total bermbagger. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. No, you don't. You don't know anything about what I did. Because behind every door Every door is locked and cipher locked. And if you don't have clearance to be in that room and read into the program of what's behind that door, you have no clue as to what's going on.
So
So
is that to say
if
there's a lot of froth at the top that doesn't really
well,
get down?
Tulsi Gabbard is reading New York Times headline level intelligence, right? Like Russian MiG-31 Foxhounds upgrade Kinzhal from Model A to Model B, right? It'll give it an extended range of 75 more kilometers, better penetration capability against Patriot. Yeah, that's great. That doesn't help Russia. But if she says that out loud, right, in front of the Russians, her benefit to Russia is gutting the day-to-day activities and the people who have corporate knowledge over 20, 30 years. That's where she benefits Russia, or that's where Trump benefits Russia, or acting as a super spy agent, which is not the role of the director of national intelligence. She is a coordinator of 19 different agencies, including Coast Guard and Department of Energy. It's the collection and it's the information about the very specific new technologies that's more valuable. She doesn't get that. So if you're the guy who is developing a way to detect Russian fiber optic drones, your department can just neutralize the terminology of your reports going up so that it doesn't seem that interesting. All right. So that it's not cut, so that, what we say is you go insular, right? You start insulating yourself because real professionals are going to stay there over the next 4 years. Okay. And they are, if you come, this happened, by the way, this happened. Crazy General Mike Flynn.
Yep.
Okay. In my humble opinion, when Barack Obama fired him, it was because he was getting numerous reports that Mike Flynn was not only a tyrannical ruler. I took part in 2 documentaries about Mike Flynn, and he did streamline the intelligence process in counterterrorism. It's when Mike Flynn became enamored with the Russian GRU. And he
so I was
thought
reading about that in Luke Harding's Collusion, where he was going over.
collusion.
Where
That's a
he
great
was
book.
going over there. He sat down next to Putin. Like Putin doesn't sit next to just anyone. The fact that he sat next to Mike Flynn.
Putin put him next to him.
Yeah.
And that was a sign to the Russian people that at the right hand of the KGB godfather, right, that I have the director of US Defense Intelligence, as the Russians call it, in your pocket. He's in my pocket. And he literally put him at the right hand of his pocket. And that was the sign. He's thinking, oh, we're warming relations with Russia, and I'm the first guy to go into GRU headquarters, and we're going to be buddies. And he comes back and he convinces, or he announces that Defense Intelligence is going to be conducting intelligence sharing with the GRU in counterterrorism, right? And that's another way of saying they bought your ass. And of course, people knew he was about to retire. He got fired because people really thought he was being groomed to be a spy.
But then that goes back to my other question, which is like, if he was, and assuming he had stayed, like if he was in that position, could he have changed the actual machinations of the intelligence agencies, like those career intelligence people doing that work, suddenly having to go, oh, right, we're working for the other side now?
Well, here's something Luke didn't get, right? Which is, by the way, Luke Harding, great journalist. Collusion was the second book on the Russian hacking probe. A lot of people say it's the first. Plot to Hack America came out a year before it. But Luke's a great journalist, and I believe anything he says over most American journalists. Really, he's very deep, and he was the one that got the STB files. When he was writing at the Independent, the Guardian. So set all that aside, when Flynn came back and they started intelligence sharing with the Russians, they were literally like clipping out the newspaper headlines from the Milwaukee Journal, the Tribune, or something like that. They were not giving them real intelligence. They were giving them information. which is much different than intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And so, absolutely, yeah, great book. Buy it now, and you will really get a good ass grounding in this whole subject.
Yeah.
And so
Agree.
my books are out of print and they're now being sold for like crazy money. Luke Hardix is still available, but this is what career professionals do, right? They were like, yeah. You want to give you some intelligence, boss? Okay, let's give him, and they scrub it, and they scrub it down to where it's dull as dishwater and just as clear. So I don't think that, now could we have information and sources compromised? Yes. And when this administration is taken down or is resigns or is kicked out of office, all of US intelligence will have to be rescrubbed and we'll have to start, as I call it, to see if it was tainted red.
Yeah. So where do we stand then with regard to the peace negotiations at the moment? What is the end game for the United States? I mean, my opinion is that Trump is just interested in a quick end to the war because it allows him to make money out of self-aggrandize himself. He can get a Nobel Peace Prize,
He'll
but
demand
also
a Nobel Peace Prize. He'll demand it. He won't get it. Norwegians hate him like,
yeah, like they should do.
Like they should. And, and it was not a thing, not a dit of what Donald Trump is doing has the word altruism or peace involved.
And this is such an important point because it's very clear that he does not have the best interests of Ukraine at all. He can give one rat's ass, one damn about Ukraine at all, morally, politically speaking. And when he talks about, I just want to end to the killing, that's not at all what he's concerned about. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stopped intel and military aid that led to the deaths of Ukraine. So my mantra, Malcolm, was that at the time of cutting intelligence sharing and aid, and you could probably say, and going forward, that the White House, Trump, would rather Ukrainian people, Ukrainian civilians would die than Russian soldiers would die in order to bring about peace.
They've already said that. We've actually already heard him say, don't you know how many Russians are dying? It's like, wait, what? That would be akin. All right. That would be akin to,
those
Charles
poor SS. Those poor SS soldiers.
The poor SS soldiers on Normandy. We're killing them. What's the US Army doing? It's just mind-boggling that the United States, this is the first time in American history that the President of the United States has openly and publicly decided to betray our allies. Now, actually, it's not the first. The first came in the war with the Barbary pirates, but at least that had some basis of education, diplomacy, and the speed of a cutter to cross the Atlantic, right? To exchange letters. There is none of that now. This is personal. It's financial. It's corrupt. And the people of Ukraine are suffering at that corruption. I see this will not get any better. I think that, Europe, this is now Europe's war for the defense of Europe. Europe and Ukraine, I've always said this, the reason I joined the Ukrainian International Legion is they were the Eastern Wall in the defense of democracy. And I left the Legion to come home to help shore up the Western Wall of democracy. And I'm failing at that task at this moment, but we are counterattacking.
It's so scary. I mean, there's such democratic backsliding. The guardrails being taken away. The judiciary is being corrupted, polluted, or ignored. I've got so much content I'm due to bring out on American. But I follow American politics very closely and do videos on American politics, and it's scary times. Truly scary times.
Let me give you a quote. I'm a Philadelphian, right? Which means I was born in the heart of American liberty and independence in a naval hospital to a family that has 152 combined nonstop years of military service from the Civil War to almost today. My niece just retired from the Navy. And that is that we have principles which this nation was founded on. The British know very, very well. We also have some approbation and some hard views about people who betray this country. I go to England every year. I should be going there now for the Prisoner Appreciation Conference in Port Marion, where where I talk about what it's like to run a prison camp. I also am a life member at Bletchley Park, so I go there to get my Station X beer, Station X ale, and but one thing I always do is I make a point of going to a church in Battersea where a particular former American is buried, right? Benedict Arnold, and paying my negative respects to him, right? This is the man that betrayed us in the American Revolution, was the human intelligence flip by young Major Andre, who we hung when we captured him as a spy. So I always I try to go to Westminster to, flick the tongue at, flip the chin at Major Andre and spit in the general direction of Benedict Arnold. But one of the things that was written in the Declaration of Independence is a quote that I keep right here. Sorry, a quote that I keep next to me because it literally epitomizes what's happening now about Donald Trump. And it'll have to be the last of this conversation because I have to leave we're having a huge pro-Ukraine march in my city in about an hour. So
Happy days, yeah.
I'm coordinating it. But this quote came from the Declaration of Independence. And a few years ago, they read the Declaration of Independence on National Public Radio, which is actually a private radio channel. It's more like your version of LBC or something. And they read the Declaration of Independence. And right-wing pro-MAGA extremists who heard them reading it thought they were reading an attack written by liberals on Donald Trump. The quote that set them off is this one, which I keep in my room, which is, "A prince whose character thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people." They were talking about Mad King George III, who would literally go mad, right? A year later, due to an illness. But MAGA thought they were talking about Trump. And they were so upset that they demanded that the Declaration of Independence stop being read on air on July 4th because they thought, right,
That's
the
hilarious.
tyrant,
that is hilarious.
Right, every act which defines the tyrant was about Donald Trump. And that's where we are.
And the fact if you're so sensitive about that, then it also means that if you are thinking that a tyrant references to your president, then
you know
he probably does have some tyrannic tendencies. Look, Malcolm, I know you've got to go. There are so many questions that have been asked by people who have done super chats to ask you. And we're not going to have time to go through them. I feel really bad. Real quick one, brilliant guest. Last slightly tinfoil hat question. What's your view on Putin's body double? Personally, I think he's definitely got them. I think there's plenty of evidence.
Yeah, he has, but I think he has two from what I can see. Yeah, he really has body doubles. Of course, he has body doubles. When they saw him at the Kursk, when he went to Kursk, right, a couple of weeks ago, that person was confused about where he was standing, and he comes into a room, and here's the general in charge of the combat forces there, and the guy practically bows to him and defers for him to enter the room first. Vladimir Putin, and he also looked shorter. That guy looked shorter, but it's very clearly a body double.
Yeah, absolutely. Really quickly, Per Budanov, Ukrainian intel operative Kiriviev, who warned the GOR of Russian invasion plans, was killed in error as a suspected traitor by the SBU in March 2022. Is comms between Ukrainian agencies still an issue?
Well, early in the war, it was. I mean, that is very clear. I mean, Ukraine has its own human intelligence organization. And as you know, I remember when that guy was killed, I was like, whoa. And then what was it? A few months later, he was hero of Ukraine. I mean, they had scrubbed it and were like, whoa, sorry. This guy may have, was one of the sources that saved this country.
Early stages of the war. I mean, there must be so much chaos.
And we do that too. I mean, we have blue on blue, right? We have friendly fire and things like that. This is a horribly huge war. It is.
Yeah.
I describe it this way. People say, well, you were in Afghanistan, you were in Libya, Iraq, and all these places. I'm like, that's just us shooting at people.
Yeah.
They barely shoot back at us. And they said, well, how do you describe this? I said, this is the Ardennes Forest, 1944. This is Band of Brothers level combat.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just
It's a
getting
different.
into your hole, not getting bombarded, moving forward, getting shot at. This is an order of magnitude
Yeah.
different. This is World War II level
And I'd
combat.
love to speak to you at length about your experiences, actually in the unit that you were with the International Legion. Just, I guess, finally, just as Goose Springsteen here, and thanks, Goose.
Love that name.
Thoughts about Nord Stream 2, as different here. He says, would you opine about Wall Street Journal, New York Times reporting over the last year that it appears a Ukrainian national who fled Poland in a car with a Ukrainian diplomatic plates was involved in the destruction of Nord Stream 2? What are your thoughts on that?
The thing is, it really early on, the propaganda benefited Russia more than anything, and it appeared well in line with Russia's let's punish the European Union by making them freeze campaign. Remember that? And I think that let's Occam's razor this thing. Russia has a robust anti internet, anti-pipeline, special naval operations capability a few hundred miles, a few hundred kilometers to the east of that, versus the Ukrainians getting in a yacht and going down there and doing it this way, whereas the attack was so clean that it really was a mini sub. And I've worked submarine special operations, so spooky things happen in spooky places by spooky people. But boat disappears off of satellite imagery. Nord Stream gets ruptured in a dramatic way. Submarine appears back in St. Petersburg. You just draw a line, and then turn back. So yeah, maybe it was some Ukrainian special mission, but if I were the Ukrainians, I would have chosen easier targets. It's fun, but then again, the theory started with a dramatic, crazy American conspiracy theorist who's like, "Oh, I know the divers, and it was NATO platforms and ex SEALs," and it's like, really, show me the contract papers
Seymour
because
Hersh,
everything.
sounding off
He's a
like,
nut.
yeah,
Everything.
he
Let me
lost
tell
it
you
on
something.
that one for sure.
Let me tell you something about U.S. intelligence. With very few exceptions, everything that happens comes down to a travel claim. You got to file your travel claim. So if you're not showing me travel claims out to Norway by SEAL Team 6 and mini sub deployment receipts,
His
and
case was really dodgy, and he's since written Substacks that have Russian phrases that have been translated verbatim. And his source is giving a Russian phrase, therefore his source is Russian. So there you go.
I can almost see the division that has to handle that guy go, useful idiot. Look, boss, I don't got to do nothing.
Yeah.
Right. I just sit still. He's like, shh. Don't tell the Kremlin. All right.
Yeah.
We're all going fishing. And we're going to say we have a special mission to handle Seymour Hersh, right?
Yeah.
These guys are out party boating in Sweden or something and claiming that they're handling U.S. intelligence assets. And then these stories pop up and they're like, did you tell him to write that? No. Did you?
Fellow traveler. No. It's our fellow traveler.
All right. Well, this is great. I'll come back. Don't worry.
Yeah, if you don't mind, because goodness me, there's so much to talk about. I feel we've only just scratched the surface, and goodness me, things are happening daily. Steve Witkoff, we didn't even get to talk about him and his sounding off last night of complete Russian propaganda.
Russia love. That it's the order of the day in the White House. You must love Russia, and you better, Putin praying to a painting of Trump. Real quick, that image of Trump believing he is now, I shit you not, a Russian icon is insane. And that leads me to the last thing I'm going to say before I run off to my rally. I have an icon. This was painted by an American painter named Anthony D'Antuono. and it's done in the iconic Russian style, or in the iconic Ukrainian style of the two first, uh, amongst the first two people killed in the war. And this woman is named Irena, as you can see, and this is all gilded. This is in gold.
Wow.
And she was a Ukrainian army soldier out near Sumy, which is on the
Right.
Russian border, who was killed on the first day of the war. And she is a mother of 5. And this child is a child named Paulina, who was her. They found her body in the car with her mother, father, and brother coming out of Mariupol, and they couldn't identify her. And all they could identify her with was her name was on a bracelet in Cyrillic that said Paulina. And then eventually they figured out who she was, and this they put her photograph up. And my friend did this in the iconic style. We're going to eventually give this to Ukraine House in Washington,
That's
which
amazing.
is the Ukrainian
Amazing.
embassy's residence. And what you can't see is, of course, at the top is Saint Michael, Saint Javelin, and Saint
Yeah.
Enlaw, right? So the patron saints of the war. But this, I
Brilliant.
commissioned this while I was in Ukraine, and it cost me a very hefty 5 digits. But this is something I wanted to to immortalize the people who lost their lives in Ukraine. The first two were women and a child.
That's amazing.
A woman soldier who defended her country and orphaned 5 children, and this poor child who was found decimated in a car. So I like to keep
Wow.
this behind me.
Yeah.
I just don't want to give it away. Maybe when President Zelensky comes back next time, I'll go to Washington and we'll turn this over to Ukraine House.
Well,
But this is what I was fighting for.
by you standing up and showing us that, by the way, it answers one question. Someone was asking earlier whether you were in a dressing gown, and it turns out you're not in a dressing gown, just from what
Oh
you were
no,
wearing, because it's
not
early in the
this.
morning. We can only see the top. We're like,
9 o'clock. I'm on my way out. I'm got to put my uniform on, actually.
oh, good on you, mate.
And we also have some wounded Ukrainian army soldiers that are coming to speak. So,
Oh, brilliant.
but this is what I do now: is
Yeah.
support my
Yeah.
battalion. I support the Ukrainian people, and of course, I make it clear to everybody that this is what I think about the Ukrainian war. If you can't read that, this was printed as a leaflet drop. They were putting these behind Russian lines and the partisans, and it says, "Russian soldier, go screw yourself, or go find a idin." And
I have a mug that I got from Kiev, just in front of Hotel Ukrainska, where I've stayed a couple of times, and it's my favorite mug, and it's got the Ukrainian colors, obviously, and then written in the form of the trident, it has the Ukrainian for Russian warship, "Go fuck yourself."
Oh,
and it's
I love
like
that.
That's my mug.
When
Yeah.
I heard that at the first time, I rolled. My friend who's a foreign language training instructor, he's a Ukrainian, told me what that meant, and I fell to the floor, because my favorite part of that is a guy who from signals intelligence who listens to communication was the conversation between the two Ukrainian officers, and the Russians go, "Hey, surrender," right? And the guy goes, "What do you think we should say?" He said, "You think I should tell him to go screw himself?" And he goes, "Yeah, just to be sure." And that's when he goes, Illinois. He goes, "Russian warship, go F yourself." And I thought, heroes of Ukraine.
It's just so iconic now as well. I mean, I've got up there. I've got
Sure.
I've got the stamp as a postcard up there.
Yes.
And yeah.
Next time we come on, I will tell you and show you believe it or not, there is an International Legion stamp that is of me. And it has not been distributed. The head of Ukroposhta has only 10 sets of them made up. And he said next time I'm in Kyiv, he will give me the Ukroposhta stamp for the black guy running the International Legion.
Awesome.
I will send Putin a set.
Yeah. Send him a postcard of the screw you Russian warship. Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, this is great.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you for all you've done and you continue to do. As you go, I will just show the audience where they can find you, and I'll talk through a couple of the questions more, but I'll let you get on with your day as you've got stuff to do. But I really appreciate that, Malcolm, and let's do this again.
All right, we'll do. Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best, my man. Bye. So that was absolutely fabulous. Really enjoyed talking to him. Sorry that we rushed through Goose's questions there. Although he did answer them, but thank you very much, Goose. Just a big thanks to Michael of UTR. Really appreciate yourself, Kevin Forst, and Richard Bennett, as ever, offering those ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to Turner Otterson, gifting a membership as well. And by the way, I'm speaking to Stephen Bendal next week, who is living in Norway. He's a Norwegian, but married to a Ukrainian, has been out there a few times and was out there recently. I tried to do a live stream with him from Kiev, but it didn't quite work out. But yeah, we must stand united against Russia. Absolutely. Just a question here from Goose Springsteen that we didn't get to talk over. Thoughts on why Russia seems to understand wedge issues in the West so well, yet to misunderstand Ukrainian society prior to the full invasion. Now, this was one of the key questions I wanted to ask him, and I didn't ask this at the end because I didn't want him to rush this one. Because Goose, next time I have him on, I'll try and remember to bring this question up. But actually, I mentioned it in the video, which is in this video, which is why is it that they got the intelligence so wrong? I think that's a really important answer, question to answer. Is it a hubris, e.g. Ukrainian identity doesn't exist, so we don't need to try to understand them? Could well be. I think that there would also just be some really serious intelligence issues with that. What a miscalculation. So the idea is that they walk into Ukraine, they drive into Ukraine, thinking that they are going to be met with open arms and embraces and bunches of flowers, and they're not. They're met by an armed resistance that ends up turning a special military operation into war. How could they get that intelligence so wrong? How could the FSB, the second greatest army in the world, not be able to predict that Ukraine would resist them and get it 180 degrees wrong? There's a lot of wrong there. So it's a really important question to answer that one. Lee Rents, thank you so much for your super sticker. Really appreciate that. And again, Goose, with the questions that you've already had asked and hopefully answered, thank you for that. Sorry, as I say, they were so rushed. And other questions, where is the CIA backup plan? That would be an interesting question to ask as well. So I'd really appreciate if you guys looked out for the next time that Malcolm and I speak, and we can get those questions in and really unpick his thoughts on that. But so glad that you've been here with me for this episode. Robert C, enjoying it, so that's all good. I'm glad that you've got as much out of this as I have as well. It almost didn't happen. I was like, 9:05, there was no answer, and then suddenly it's like, yeah, I'm coming on. It's like, thank goodness for that. So sorry it's a little bit late. Anyway, take care, guys, and I will speak to you soon. I don't know if I'm going to have time to get out. I've got a geopolitics video I really should get out, and I've got an American politics one that's now gathering more and more information. It's going to become massively unwieldy. It'd be like a 2-hour one. I suppose if it is, it is. And if you don't watch it, you don't watch it. There you go. But take care, everybody, and stay strong for your support of Ukraine. And please remember that in the description below, there is our own NAFO fundraiser that is going to raise funds for 4 vehicles. And we're doing that together with Roman Trokomets and Rick the Ukrainian. You can find Malcolm Nance. Just look for his name on Twitter, on Blue Sky. He has a Substack called Special Intelligence. And we have him on YouTube as well, just under Malcolm Nance. And I'll just bring up the campaign that we are doing, which is at 64%. Be absolutely great if you can help out with that one. It is a pretty big campaign, but I really appreciate any help that you guys can give to that to help those units that need that. In the meantime, take care, guys, and I will speak to you soon. Toodle pips.